This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Former Ambassador Peter Galbraith says Vladimir Putin wants to be a player on the world stage. Will it be as a good guy or a bad guy? Professor Sandra Hanson suggests the American dream may be changing toward values rather than wealth. And Bill Press talks with Politico's Manu Raju about Lindsey Graham's resurgence. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Foreign policy expert Peter Galbraith says Vladimir Putin might be more cooperative if he wants to be a player in world affairs. He also says President Obama's response to the Russians is sophisticated and nuanced.
And we say hello to Peter Galbraith, former ambassador to Croatia, senior diplomatic fellow at the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation, where his work focuses on Iraq, the greater Middle East, and conflict resolution and post-conflict reconstruction, specifically in the Balkans, Indonesia, Iraq, India, Pakistan, and Southeast Asia. Peter Galbraith, thank you so much for joining us on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, good to be with you again.
As an expert on the Balkans and Eastern Europe, can you tell us what Vladimir Putin is really up to?
I think there are a variety of things that he's up to. First, I think he's reversing what he sees as a historic wrong in which Crimea was assigned to Ukraine rather than Russia. And the status of Ukraine is really, of Crimea is very specific. It is a Russian majority area. It had been part of the Russian Soviet Republic in the Soviet Union until 1954. Was assigned to Ukraine because Khrushchev had been the party boss in Ukraine, and Solzhenitsyn says indeed it was a drunken Politburo meeting where this happened. It is where the base of the Russian Black Sea Fleet is. So there are a lot of very specific historic circumstances that led Russians and Putin to think that Crimea being part of Ukraine was unjust historically and against the will of the population. Second,
go ahead. Sorry.
Second, I think, of course, the Russians had supported Yanukovych, the pro-Russian president of Ukraine, who was ousted earlier this year, and I think Putin was resentful that his ally was ousted, and that indeed the United States and the European Union had a much larger role in the events in Kiev than Russia did. And third, I think this is something that's been true of Russia since the end of the Soviet Union, but is particularly true for Putin. He wants to be a player on the international stage. And if he is a player, then he's much more likely to be cooperative. Where he feels shut out, he is less likely to be cooperative.
Then has the U.S. response been appropriate, or has, as Senator McCain has called it, feckless?
No, I mean it's very easy if you're on the outside to thump your chest and say it's feckless, it's a sign of U.S. weakness. But when you're confronting these situations in the real world, you have to ask, what is your alternative? There's no possibility of using military force to take on the Russians. Yes, we could ratchet up sanctions, and I think President Obama is on a track to do that. But remember, that has consequences, and not just consequences for Europe's economy and therefore our economy. It has consequences internationally. Our number one foreign policy priority is to stop Iran from getting nuclear weapons, and there's some very promising negotiations that are underway. But they require Russia's cooperation. If Iran thinks that it has an ally in Russia in breaking the sanctions and it doesn't need a deal, well, we're not going to get a deal. So we need Russia in Afghanistan. It's the route through which our troops are supplied and maybe the route in which we would want to have our forces withdraw. So there are lots of consequences to different foreign policy options, and I think President Obama has adopted a sensible, measured course of action. In the end, what will lead to a resolution of the situation in Crimea is not sanctions, it's not pressure on Russia. It is that Russia's annexation of Crimea will never be accepted internationally. It will be seen as illegitimate, and over time, countries tend to want to have their borders be seen as legitimate.
Are we headed back to a Cold War?
Well, I think President Obama has handled this in a way that would lessen the chances that we'll head back into a Cold War. You know, a return to the Cold War, that is a time of rivalry between the U.S. and then Soviet Union, now Russia, building up nuclear arsenals, conflict in all sorts of corners of the world without international cooperation. This is a disaster. And it we'd be talking about big buildups in our military. We would be talking about peripheral conflicts. It would certainly do damage to our economy. So if we can avoid that, that would be a very good thing. But on the other hand, that doesn't mean that we simply accept the Russian annexation of Crimea.
Sure. We're speaking with Peter Galbraith, Senior Diplomatic Fellow at the Center for Arms Control and Nonproliferation. Since Ukraine gave up its nuclear capability, does the West have an obligation to put up its own nuclear weapons as an umbrella to protect Ukraine?
No, we do not have a security treaty relationship with Ukraine. It is not part of NATO, and in fact, the current crisis, I think, highlights the need for caution in the enlargement of NATO. I don't think that the United States is should be in the business of providing security guarantees to some of the unsettled borders of the former Soviet Union. That actually is the role of the United Nations. It is a collective security organization, and that's the forum where this ought to be addressed.
How would you assess the administration's response to the Syrian civil war? Did President Obama make a mistake in drawing a line in the sand?
He drew a line in the sand, and he had a spectacular success, actually, with Russia's help, which is to say, he had said that the use of chemical weapons was unacceptable. Chemical weapons were used. He was then moving to might have led to a military strike that would have accomplished nothing. And instead, he got a deal in which the Syrians agreed to sign the treaty and to give up their chemical weapons. And they have declared, we think, all or almost all of their chemical weapons, and there is a process in which they are surrendering them. Now, that has gone a little slowly, but nonetheless, that process is underway. It's much more than could have been accomplished by some kind of military strike.
Yeah. What about being able to rely on Russia as a mediator in dealing with Syria and Iran? I mean, is that in danger now with the situation with Russia?
Well, yes. Obviously, the level of cooperation with Russia is less, but it doesn't mean that we should cut them off from places where they can play a role that serves what is in our interest. And certainly Russia needs to be part of the international coalition in the negotiations with Iran. Iran cannot see that Russia is an out, and therefore they don't need to continue with the process of providing assurance that they're not going to develop nuclear weapons. Russia has very good relations with the Syrian regime. I see no prospect that the Syrian civil war is going to be resolved militarily, certainly that no prospect that the rebels are going to prevail. And so if you're going to have some kind of political settlement, you're going to need to have one of the major powers that is close to the Syrian regime to play a role, and that is Russia.
This situation in Ukraine, how do you see that affecting the European or perhaps even the global economy?
The situation in Ukraine by itself is not going to have an impact, but the response, that is to say the sanctions on Russia, could affect the global economy. It will affect the global economy. And the more serious the sanctions, the greater the impact. Russia is a major supplier of energy to the global market, particularly gas to Europe. If Europe then begins to look for alternate sources, that's going to be more expensive. It's going to slow down growth. If growth in Europe slows down, it's going to slow down growth in the United States. So there absolutely is a cost to the actions we take in response to Russia's annexation of Crimea. That doesn't mean we shouldn't take it. It simply means that there's a cost and we should be aware of it. And we should be prudent. The real test of our actions is not whether it makes us feel good, oh God, we did something, but whether it's going to influence Russian behavior. We should be cautious about escalating sanctions that hurt us if, in fact, they are not going to change Russian behavior.
A fine line for us to walk, I guess, at this point.
Well, and that's why having a President Obama adopting a sophisticated and nuanced approach, that's what you do when you're President of the United States, and it's very easy for your critics outside to thump their chests because they don't have to do that.
Okay. Peter Galbraith, former ambassador to Croatia, currently senior diplomatic fellow at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation. We certainly appreciate your time with us today, as always, sir, and we look forward to doing it again real soon.
Well, very good to be with you.
Thank you. And this is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Professor Sandra Hanson defines and re-examines the American dream and how it's changing, and we'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
He's back, and this time he has eyeglasses. Yes, Rick Oops Perry is back, pitching himself for another presidential run. What fun! Who can forget the Texas governor's nationally televised pratfall during a 2011 presidential debate when he couldn't remember the third federal agency he intended to axe? Well, he later sniffed, if anybody's looking for the smoothest debater, I readily admit I'm not that person. But Rick, you weren't debating. You were simply trying to recite your own 3 talking points. 1, 2, oops. And the issue isn't whether you're smooth, but whether you're stupid. Way too stupid to be President of the United States of America. That's a role in which this Texan would need to match wits, not with such lame brains as Rick Santorum or Michelle Bachmann, but Vladimir Putin. But wait, there's a new Rick. As mentioned, this go-round he's sporting black-frame designer eyeglasses, which his makeover consultants insist make him look smarter. Actually, the bespectacled Perry looks like a guy squinting at the thermostat to see if he can get his IQ up to room temperature. This is the governor who's been hunkered down for 14 years as the chief executive of the state with the highest percentage of people with no health coverage, the second highest percentage of children with no health insurance, and numero uno in the nation for women without coverage. Then, when Obamacare was made available to provide insurance for millions of Texans, this Mensa in eyeglasses said, hell no, we don't need no government-provided health benefits. This is Jim Hightower saying, we? For his entire 30-year career in political office, Perry and family have gladly accepted platinum-level health benefits from the government for themselves. I'm guessing that even those $500 glasses he's wearing were put on the taxpayer's tab.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
The American dream is not the same for all Americans, and Professor Sandra Hanson says it may be changing from one of rags to riches into one in which values are more important than achieving great wealth.
And we say hello to Sandra Hanson, professor of sociology at the Catholic University of America and a fellow at the university's Institute for Policy Research and Catholic Studies. She is a co-editor of a book, The American Dream in the 21st Century, in which she and a group of contributors examine the American dream and consider its intersection with politics, religion, race, gender, and generation. Sandra Hanson, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
It's a pleasure to join you.
And we're glad to have you as well. You know, everyone seems to strive to achieve the American dream. What does your research show the American dream to be?
Well, it's resilient. It's holding in strong even during these difficult economic times. And I'm not sure if all Americans are aware of that in fact, the hopefulness of it sometimes is more important when things are bad rather than good. But some of the things that we find that Americans say that it means to them are having a good family life, quality health care, education, being able to speak your mind, achieving peace in the world, being able to succeed in spite of your family background, and having time to enjoy the good things in life. So Americans aren't just talking about wealth these days when they talk about the American dream.
Do blacks have a different dream from whites, or women a different dream from men?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On that one, I would distinguish the material reality of how these different groups are doing from what they are saying themselves about how much they believe in the dream. So the prospects for African Americans remain less than the dream would suggest. There's segregation, there's discrimination, there's inferior schools, unequal wages. It's more of a nightmare than a dream for many African Americans. Jim Lowen, one of the authors in the books, talks about ongoing racial segregation in neighborhoods. And he says, we need to admit this. We need to reform. We need to change our racial geography. So, and Obama's starting to address this. There is a rising middle class. There are dreams that African Americans have that are almost, you can't distinguish them from whites. And I would say the same about men and women. They have the same dreams, even though the reality of achieving them for women is not the same as for men.
Mm-hmm. Are Americans today divided by race, class, income, and ideology more than ever before? And if so, does that turn the dream into more of a kind of a nightmarish kaleidoscope?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer, again, depends on, are we talking about the economic realities for people of different race, class, income, or their hopes? So there is an increasing wealth gap. We acknowledge these difficulties in the book. There's a large number of Americans without jobs, in poverty. There's an expanding poor immigrant population, and there's a lot of Americans without health care insurance. So is this glue that binds us unraveling? I would say no. I would say that this is so powerful, this dream, that even those that are having lower chance of achieving it continue to dream. And if we were more responsible, and I think we're changing in this direction, Obama is now speaking this language, a common good, a core value of social and economic justice, where both the dream that we are dreaming and the opportunities for achieving it go hand in hand. That's what we would hope for.
Mm-hmm. Today's children, are we looking at the first generation that does worse than its parents' generation?
Well, Jim, I don't know if you're a baby boomer, but I am, and I can tell you that we were told we were not. There were too many of us. There weren't going to be enough jobs. We were not going to be as successful as that preceding World War II generation. So there's a fear with each generation, but each has done well. And Americans have continued optimism layered with kind of a new reality. Today's youth will achieve a dream. We think so, maybe in new ways. They're the first global generation. Their dreams might be dreams that are not just American and not just about wealth, but they are part of this shift towards a dream that focuses on equity, equality, community. So I think I have pretty amount of confidence that we're not going to all of a sudden see a new generation that doesn't achieve some version of the dream.
Okay. I'd like to take just a side moment to say thank you for not recognizing whether or not I'm a baby boomer. That was a feel-good moment for me. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, we're now the people in power, so we're now the ones that are stealing the dream.
That's right. We're speaking with Sandra Hanson, professor of sociology at Catholic University, a fellow at the university's Institute for Policy Research and Catholic Studies, and today we're discussing the book, The American Dream in the 21st Century, of which she is a co-editor. President Obama, has his hope and change refrain been a good thing for promoting the American dream, or was this just kind of a feel-good vision for America?
Yeah, John White is my co-editor on the book, and he's a presidential scholar. He thinks hope and change inevitably led to disappointment, since what was to be hoped and what exactly was the change? It was a powerful slogan in 2008 because of an unpopular president, George W. Bush, and his policies. But going in a different direction is one thing. Building a mandate for change is something else. In other words, Obama didn't fully elaborate during the campaign what would constitute the dream. Instead, he kind of just promised to restore it. That being said, like Roosevelt before him, Obama has had to summon the nation from the depths of despair. He is an exemplar of the dream, really. He's reviving it and reclaiming it for the rest of us at a defining point in history with a war, a bad economy. And Americans did respond. We saw a blip in the attitudes Americans had, with more of them believing in the dream after they saw that this person from this humble past with this name and this skin color could become president.
Mm-hmm. How does the president's vision of hope differ from President Reagan's Morning in America mantra?
Yeah. Again, John White, my co-editor, is the person who really has a view on this. Reagan's Morning in America ad, what it featured was mostly all white faces in a suburban setting. It was Leave It to Beaver all over again, and I can say that to a fellow baby boomer who knows about that show.
Right, that's right.
So during the Reagan era, the American dream was really centered on materialist things, owning a home, getting a college education. We're saying it's now more spiritual, post 9/11, Great Recession. And Obama's embodiment, as I said, those humble beginnings, he revitalized the dream during a very difficult economic time. And he is now talking about issues like race in a class in a way that very few presidents have. Inequality here gets in the way of the dream.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as the future of the American dream, and how do you make it more of a reality?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good time to examine it, Jim. Even though maybe there's a crisis that's making us re-examine it, it can only be good. John Zogby, one of the authors in the book, says Americans need to come to grip with a new reality. Excess is no longer sustainable. It just isn't. We need leaders in government and business to find solutions to Americans' concerns about jobs, about health care, about housing. Bill D'Antonio, my colleague on the book, he says now that the white European ex-ethnics have made it, are they more likely to step on the hands of those trying to climb the ladder? So we think that the young generation will forge ahead, higher taxes for the wealthy, more assistance to the poor, less on rags to riches, more on values and visions of a good society. So I say that the future is involving a more diverse America, which is actually a strength, not a weakness. And this American dream, it's not yours, it's not mine, it's ours, and it's attainable by anybody only if it's attainable by everyone. I think that's the future and the reality of the dream.
And to me, that kind of defines hope and change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there you go, back to Obama.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it's americasdemocrats.org. Of course I was going back there.
Those are two good slogans, and if we can work a little harder on those, and I see it going in that direction. The authors of this book are very optimistic in a realistic way.
Okay. The name of the book, The American Dream in the 21st Century. Sandra Hanson, professor of sociology at Catholic University and fellow at the university's Institute for Policy Research and Catholic Studies, co-editor. Encourage you to go out and check it out, The American Dream in the 21st Century. Sandra, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We'd love to have you back sometime.
You bet. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Politico's Manu Raju.
Indeed. Some interesting Senate races this season. Manu Raju covers politics and as a senior congressional reporter, particularly covering these important Senate and House races this year. For Politico, joining us on our news line this morning, Manu, good morning.
Good morning.
Hey, good to have you with us. Some interesting races that we've been talking about, but I was interested in your story a couple of days ago about Lindsey Graham, because this is a guy that we were told a few months ago he was going to be in trouble, man, with the Tea Party down in South Carolina. Hasn't really worked out that way, has it?
No, it really hasn't. It is interesting because, of course, he's a guy that has broken from the conservative orthodoxy on a lot of issues. He supported the president's two Supreme Court nominees. He's talked about cutting a deal on climate change. Of course, he was the co-author of the Senate's immigration bill.
Yeah.
And he was ripe for the picking, particularly after the Tea Party wave in 2010. The House Republican delegation in South Carolina grew increasingly conservative. There were plenty of candidates who could take him on. But what Lindsey Graham realized, he's a savvy, very savvy guy, and knew that he was in trouble. So early on, he started quietly building a very, very sophisticated political operation back home. As soon as the 2010 wave happened, essentially, he started picking and choosing these precinct captains throughout the state. Now he's got about 5,200 of them. He built 6 regional field offices. He raised enormous amounts of money. He's raised about $11 million for the cycle so far, which is a lot for South Carolina.
Yeah.
And most importantly, he built bridges with some of these key prospective opponents and effectively convinced them not to run against him, not just because of the political operations he's built, but because of political favors that he's done for these guys who are considering running against him. Mick Mulvaney was the most interesting of those. He's a congressman. He didn't vote for John Boehner for Speaker. He was part of the conservative Republican study committee. But Lindsey Graham lobbied John Boehner to get him a seat on the House Financial Services Committee anyways, and Boehner did because they're friends, and Mulvaney was a threat to Lindsey Graham. So, the combination of all these things has helped ensure that he has had a lackluster field. There are 6 candidates running against Lindsey Graham for this in this this June 10th primary. They need to prevent him from getting more than 50% to avoid a runoff, and it's possible he may not even get into a runoff, because none of these guys have demonstrated really much viability. They barely even have raised more than $500,000 when Lindsey Graham still has more than $8 million in the bank.
Wow. Now, contrast Lindsey Graham's success with and the way he's dealt with the Tea Party with Mitch McConnell in Kentucky.
In some ways they're similar, in some ways they're different. And McConnell also realized that he had a problem on his hand. He quietly started to try to curry support from members of the state legislature early in the cycle, asked for their endorsements. He managed to get virtually all of them. Of course, he built an alliance with Rand Paul very early, realized that Rand was a threat to him, and Rand and him now have this political alliance, and Rand is endorsing McConnell, of course. But the difference with McConnell and Lindsey is that McConnell is really dumping a ton of money to eviscerate Matt Bevin, his opponent. He's really going negative, and is running sort of a scorched earth campaign against Bevin, and it seems to be working. Whereas Lindsey Graham is sort of kind of ignoring his opponents and letting them kind of fall apart on their own accord.
Isn't Bevin the guy that went to a cockfight?
Yes, he did, and that's Mitch McConnell's up with the radio ad attacking him for going to the cockfighting.
That's what the politics has become in Kentucky. Now, again, for the last month, the real narrative has been, it looks like Democrats are going to lose the Senate for sure, right? And now suddenly, because of all these different very competitive races in Louisiana, in Kentucky, in Georgia, in Alaska, we know the ones, North Carolina, New Hampshire. But now it looks like the narrative is changing, Manu, that because of some new polls showing that Mark Pryor's stronger in Arkansas than we might have thought, Michelle Nunn doing so well in Georgia, and now the stories I see say, well, Democrats may hold on after all. What's your read?
I think it's still very, very close. I mean, the polls will swing both one way or another. I'm not sure that that those polls yesterday from the Times, some of them seemed right, but some of them I wasn't sure about. I mean, I'm not sure if Mark Pryor really has a 10-point lead over Tom Cotton. That really seems to be an outlier in the polls. But I do think that's a very close race, and I think that Pryor can certainly win that. I was out there last year. I spent some time on the ground. Pryor's a very strong candidate. He understands what he needs to do to win. He's a different kind. This is not Blanche Lincoln in 2010. He's really prepared for a tough race there. And in Mary Landrieu has the same thing with Pryor. Really has a long history in the state. Their names are very powerful. They have that brand built in. I think the hardest Democratic state is probably going to be North Carolina. I do think that Kay Hagan is probably the most vulnerable of all of those candidates. She does not have unlike Pryor and Landrieu and Mark Begich to some extent, does not have the same sort of name ID and family legacy that those folks have, that'll be interesting. She's of course getting bombarded by the Koch brothers by more than any other candidate right now. I think overall, the Republicans can certainly still take control of the Senate. I just think the polls will constantly shift, and in some ways, the general election really has not started yet. I mean, the ad wars in a lot of these states really have not really kicked into full gear. So we'll see a shift, I think, come this summer in the polls even more, one way or the other.
Okay. All right, Manu, it's fun to watch and very interesting to have your comment and your insights, having been on the ground in so many of these states and watching them every day. Manu Raju is with Politico, Politico.com. Thanks, Manu. Talk to you again soon. Thanks so much. Okay.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Peter Galbraith, Sandra Hanson, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For AmericasDemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate.